What is going on, everybody? Hitmonchan here, back again with another Pokemon trading card game video. Today it's not a deck tech, we are doing a little set review of the brand new Twilight Masquerade set. I am here with my good friend, fellow PokeTuber, you know him, you love him, Mitchin Chicken. He's gonna be joining me today.
Hello.
And we're just gonna be, we're gonna be yapping. We're gonna be talking about some of the Twilight Masquerade cards, our brand new set. I believe May 24th is the release date. And it's gonna be, it's looking to be a good one. We got a lot of really interesting cards coming out, a lot of new archetypes being formed, and a lot of new cards that are gonna further develop previous archetypes, which is, all the trademarks of a good set. So we're just gonna hop right in.
Just wanted to give a quick thank you to the lovely sponsors of the Hitmonchan channel. If you need codes, you know where to go. Head over to ptcglstore.com and use code Hitmon to get 5% off your order. And be sure to check out Pokemon.gg, the best Pokemon card tracker and deck builder there is. You can track your entire collection and see its value, build decks quickly and easily, create custom wish lists, and so much more. Join Pokemon.gg by clicking the link below and use code Hitmon to get $5 off a pro membership. These are some great products for some great prices. Thank you to my sponsors for supporting the channel, and thanks to you for supporting me too. And now let's get right back into the video.
And the first card I have on the list right here is Sinistcha EX. Now, Infusion Retribution is the key attack here. This obviously evolves from Poltergeist, and for one colorless energy, you can choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon for each basic grass energy in your discard pile, and then shuffle those energy cards back into your deck. Now, this is like the key aspect of this card. What do you think, Mitchin Chicken? Do you think this is any good?
Yo, it sucks. the card's terrible.
We're gonna be plain and simple. I mean, I like to goof and gaff as much as the next guy, but yeah, the attack itself is not very good. I think you can obviously do some cool stuff like, Teal Mask Ogerpon, load a bunch of energies on the board, and then use the single prize Sinistcha to discard them, and then put them back with Infusion Retribution for a snipe in the late game. I'll put a sample deck list up on the screen right now. But yeah, I think this is definitely like meme deck. Like, this is like my channel tier kind of deck. You'll watch this deck on my channel, but I wouldn't expect it to really like win or.
Yeah, it's got like a fun design that kind of fits with the baby one. Puts in the discard, they recycle back, but it's one of those gimmicks where it's just like, oh yeah, it's kind of nice synergy, but it's just not practically good.
And speaking of the single prize one, we'll talk about it right now. This single prize Sinistcha, I think this card is actually just a better card in general. Like, matcha all out, yeah. You're doing 70 damage times the amount of basic grass energy you discard from your Pokemon, but you can only discard up to 3 basic grass. I mean, you can knock out Charizard for 1 energy, on your Pokemon, whoop-de-doo, but still, at the end of the day, you need more energies on your Pokemon, and it's still, like, a lot of effort to really do a lot of damage.
Yeah, it's capped at 3, which means it can't even hit hard. Like, only killing Charizard is okay, but you're not going to be playing a stage 1 and all this stuff. Like, this is a full archetype commitment kind of card, and just killing Charizard's not really enough. Only way to make this like seemingly work engine-wise is a bunch of Ogerpon EXs on the bench, which are like not a good bunch of Pokemon you want as a support engine. You're trying to focus maybe on being like a 1-prize attacker, but then you got a bunch of 2-prize liabilities on board, so I think there's a lot of problems with this.
Yeah, and this Teal Mask Ogerpon, it's looking like it is the best way, quote-unquote, best way to play Sinistcha. I mean, the card itself, I think, is very good. We'll talk about that right now. I think the card is actually pretty good as its own card. It's kind of got its own engine as well. Like, the Teal Dance ability is pretty strong. You attach a grass energy from your hand, and then you draw a card. Like, 2 really good things. Draw and energy acceleration, but you got 2 10 HP. You got a pretty expensive attack that's, like, not good against anything else other than Charizard. So I'm curious to see, like, what do you think? I know you're like an Ogerpon lover. I mean, like, I know you love Ogerpon, and we got 4 of them in this set. So what do you think of the Teal Mask in general?
Yeah, I like Ogerpon as a Pokemon. The cards, obviously, though, we're going to focus on. Teal Mask is interesting because it feels like there's potential, especially with the ability. The attack's, like, not the strongest. You need a ton of energy to really scale hard enough. Other than, like, like we said, Charizard. It kills Charizard reasonably, which could be good for, like, an Ogerpon box. So, like, this one kills the Zard. Something with Teal Dance is interesting is you can charge this up and use the mask to switch between them. So you can sort of use this to facilitate the colorless costs of the other Ogerpon types, like fighting and water. So that part's kind of good. but I still don't know if like an Ogerpon box is a proper deck either. I think this card has like potential, but is not like, it's better than Sinistcha, but it's not like up there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said. I genuinely thought they would print some sort of special A-spec to kind of help this. It seems like an archetype they were really with the set and the way they designed the other Ogerpon cards. So I'm kind of surprised. Maybe we'll get some more support for it later. But as of right now, I think it's like, you're at 210 HP, you're getting sneezed on and then KO'd, and you're giving up 2 prize. And it's like, it's kind of tough when you don't have the raw damage output, where, you know, Chen Pao can do unlimited damage, and it has 10 more HP than this Ogerpon, you know? So I think that the trade-off isn't really there. And we'll talk about, I think, the other Ogerpons right now, since we mentioned the box. Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon, I'm gonna be honest, I think this card is kind of bad. Like, I think out of all the Ogerpons, it's the worst one. I know it's got some uses, but, you know, you go into it, Mitch and Chicken. I want to hear your take on this card.
I don't think this card is garbage, that's for sure. I think the attack cost is really expensive, which is hard to utilize. But like 280 is a good number. With max belt, that's 330. So you kill pretty much any relevant evolution EX. Could be good utility early in fire decks like Zard. The cost is expensive, so it's like, will we actually see that? I don't know. It's also unfortunate this is triple fire, because this one wouldn't line up with the idea of loading up energies with the Teal mask and then switching with the mask item. But I think it's got like, it's kind of the same as the grass. I feel like a lot of the Ogerpons actually kind of have this, except the stone one. I think stone's actually good. But a lot of them feel like they have good potential, but are maybe just not quite there yet. And I think that's why a lot of people actually expected an A-spec to potentially support them, like an energy to make the costs a little bit easier. But 280 is a lot of damage. That's all I'm going to say. There could be merit for it in the future for sure.
Yeah, an interesting idea I've seen floating around for this Hearthflame mask is, you know, that Dynamic Blaze attack is the one you're going to be doing 240 to an evolution Pokemon. Max built, that's 330, but then you have to discard all the energy. An interesting synergy I've seen is in those Arceus Armarouge decks, because you could very easily one-shot a Charizard. Then again, though, you're leaving a 210 HP weak 2 prizer in the active, as opposed to you could use Radiant Heatran in that deck to also one-shot a Charizard. So it seems like it has niches that are better. But the card definitely has like a strong attack. I think the energy cost is what's holding it back right now. And, you know, Wrathful Hearth as an attack is like the attack that seems to be the synergy with the Ogerpon box. You know, 1 fighting, or 1 fire, I should say, 2 colorless, and you do 20 times the amount of damage counters on it. But realistically, your 210 HP basic Pokemon, you're probably going to get knocked out in 1 hit against like 90% of the decks. So are you really ever going to use it? I don't think so in that room.
It's pretty niche, unless you can potentially like buff the HP up, something like a Tool, or just a deck that hits 180 early like a Zard before you've taken any prizes, or like Arceus DTE turn 2 Trinity Nova. If they're like kind of dumbly swinging into it, like they really shouldn't be, but like if you catch someone doing that because they're kind of greedy, they just want to start attacking, you can just OHKO things. But like that's pretty niche. And then in most cases you're going to be dying anyways, unless like maybe you buff it up with tools and then they punch into it, and then maybe you have like a charm on a different Pokemon, and then, or like a different Ogerpon, and then you mask into this, you blow something up because you have a lot of damage. There's like some niche uses there.
The potential is there, again, like you said, with a lot of the other Ogerpons. But speaking of the other one, I do want to talk about the Cornerstone mask. I think this one, I agree, I think this one has the like most potential of actually being hard. I'll let you take the lead and just right out the gate.
I think this card's actually good. Mainly for the ability, obviously. It prevents all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. This is something that over time we've seen like catch decks that are almost entirely focused, particularly Alolan Vulpix back before Gardevoir sort of changed its structure. That deck was almost entirely ability Pokemon, and it sort of just walled that. In the current day, the way Charizard decks are built, pre this set, Vulpix completely walls that if you get a clean lone Vulpix V-Star up. So Ogerpon sort of does the same thing that Vulpix filled, but it's not on an attack, so you don't need to charge it up, the second it hits the board, it's active. They can't do things like Gust, bring it back in the active, clear the effect. And it's a basic, so it's easier to slot in. So there's a lot of merit to it there. I think you can definitely catch a lot of things. Also, fighting is probably a better typing. And then it's got, the attack is okay. I feel like you wish it did a little more damage, but it also shreds, which is another nice utility on there.
Yeah, and you can play it with the other Ogerpons. You're at 1 fighting, 2 colorless attack cost, but realistically, I think the card is actually kind of better on its own rather than as a wall in an Ogerpon box when you have a bunch of other Ogerpons on the bench that your opponent just gust up for free and then take a knockout on those. So we're almost done the Ogerpons. We have one more EX to show you. Wellspring Mask, Ogerpon EX, which I think that I'm really excited for this card. I think this card, it's the unique attributes of Torrential Pump. There's a lot of cool combos you can do with it. I do think the Cornerstone Mask one is better, but basically Torrential Pump is kind of like a little bit of a Radiant Greninja on steroids in terms of damage, but you have a bit more of a trade-off in the fact that you're a 2.
Yeah, I think the initial reaction to this card was pretty nice, because 100 and then 120 to the bench is pretty good. But then I think you sort of just realize that, like, the energy cost is expensive. It's not something cheap. So we need acceleration. And then at that point, is Greninja not just better? Because we're doing very similar numbers, but on a 1-prizer, which is a big difference.
Yeah, and Greninja also has the added ability of being a support Pokemon that helps your consistency, and it's just, I think, overall a better card. My initial thoughts, as many people had, was to play this in Chen Pao, because obviously water Pokemon, free acceleration, it feels like it works well together, and you shuffle the energy back into your deck, which is a thing, which is why I think this card actually does work better in Lugia. We have the new Legacy Energy that's going to come out, which we will touch on in a little bit. It's a new Ace Spec card, but it's basically a Rainbow Energy, and with Torrential Pump, you'll shuffle it back into the deck, so you can reuse that energy while also getting snipe damage, which is something that Lugia has never had easy access to as of late. It used to have Amazing Raikou. Now you can use Mew to, like, copy Greninja, but this is just a straight-up snipe, and straight-up snipe is really, really good, especially when your opponent might not be expecting it, or it's an additional thing they have to prepare for.
Yeah, I think that energy is crazy strong in Lugia especially, and being able to reuse it is going to give it a lot of options. I think that's probably where this card shines the most, because in other scenarios, Greninja is usually just better, but the shuffling takes advantage of that. So it could be pretty interesting there as a tool. Obviously, 2-prize or low HP is a bit of a problem, but you still, you make use of it when it's really valuable, and the snipe damage is going to actually give you some good value, so you could probably make it work well in Lugia. Also, Sob, probably kind of a overlooked attack. That's actually a really nice first attack that sometimes tend to just be kind of useless. But 1 energy, 20, and then during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. So locking no retreat on a 1 colorless energy is actually really good utility, I'm sure, in a lot of things. So that can be a nice little bonus on this card for sure.
Yeah, and for that effect specifically, we've seen cards like Mawile to great success. And something nice about Sob is you can do the 20 damage, but if you attach a DTE, you can still do 0 damage if you want to infinitely lock something in the active. So I think that, that's definitely an attack that's worth noting. Another very solid first attack that's, like, far from useless. So Wellspring Mask, you're going to want to look out for it. And now we got some funnies. This is more gimmicky stuff. I wouldn't expect to see this at the top tables, but I do think that this is kind of like a weird archetype that they actually, I think, tried to make really good, given on how they designed the cards. So we'll talk about kind of the main engine, I think, together. You can't talk about one without the other. This Dipplin has the Festival Lead ability, which means if the Festival Grounds Stadium is in play, which I'll throw up here as well, you can actually attack twice, but use only this Pokemon's attack attempts. And its attack is do the wave, and you're doing 20 damage for each of your bench Pokemon. So this single prize Dipplin with 1 energy can knock out a Charizard if it's able to attack twice, which is really hilarious. And also, its support engine is also hilarious, because if you have that Dipplin in the active or another card with the Festival Lead ability, you can just search for any card you want. And there's no limitation. So if you have 4 of these Thwackeys on the bench, you can search for 4 cards every turn with your Dipplin in the active, which I think is, like, really strong in theory. But again, You gotta get a lot to get there, so I don't think it has potential to actually be an archetype, but what do you think, Dan?
I think, like, meme deck potential 100%. In terms of, like, proper archetype that you could see doing good at majors, it's kind of hard to say, because it feels like surface level, this is kind of niche. Like, you consider, okay, these are all one prizers. We have really good consistency to be able to chain these, because Thwackey being able to stack searching any card is really strong. I think this actually has decent potential. If you go back to Dipplin, it does what, a potential 100 damage.
Yeah.
For 1 energy on a 1 prizer that attacks twice. So as long as you string Dipplins, maintain your bench, you did 200 every turn on a 1 prizer with 1 energy. Like, that's pretty strong. Of course, you need a lot set up, right? Like, you got to be stringing 1 prizers. You need your board to go wide early, so that way you can be playing the game and consistently stringing these guys. The stadium also needs to be in play, and it's not a very good stadium either. For what I recall, it's about as close as possible to a stadium that's just like a blank card that reads stadium. Like, the effect is not good. I think it's something like cleansing special conditions or something useless. It's pretty bad.
I didn't even put it in the set review. It's a really terrible card.
If it didn't have synergy with these abilities, it would be a completely garbage card. It just reads Festival Grounds, and that's what we care about. But I think these cards actually have potential. I'm not going to lie. I think Dipplin, Thwackey are just going to come down to consistently setting up. And if you can find the right list to do that, I think it's actually a lot stronger than people are giving it credit for.
All right. Interesting. I mean, we do have these other festival lead ability Pokemon. There's a Goldeen and Orlix, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think those ones are worse. I don't remember exactly what they do.
Yeah, I don't have them. Like, I wasn't gonna talk about them in their own kind of spotlight, but basically they just have, like, very vanilla attacks. The only thing, though, is they are basics, so you can lead it. Then you can get Thwackeys up, search for your Dipplin, and then either use something like a rescue board, I think it is, to retreat for free, and then you can attack with the Dipplin. So there's definitely that synergy. Like, there is ways to make this work, but I think consistency is going to be the biggest challenge.
Yeah, the other thing I was considering is as a neutral engine, something like one of those festival lead Pokemon. I guess you can pick the one that has even the slightest amount of extra utility. Potentially as an engine to utilize Thwackey in non-festival lead focus decks, like not Dipplin attacking deck, a general archetype, something else. You could potentially use like a basic with a rescue board, like you mentioned. Play a thinner line of Thwackeys, aim to just get up 1 or 2, and then you search your deck for a card every turn. I don't know if just putting Pidgeot in play is easier at that point to use quick search. Unless you're getting like 2 out, at that point you start to recognize better value. But that's a lot of deck space and setup commitment too. So I don't know if that can ever work, but it is worth noting that you could make use of Thwackey in other decks if you really wanted to.
And now back to one of the EX Pokemon, probably the goofiest EX award is Magcargo EX. Yeah, this card, I think this card is like another like meme deck potential. I mean, you can use, Ground Burn, you're discarding the top card of each player's deck and do 140 more damage for each energy discarded. So you can do up to 420 damage. That's crazy. But the chances that you're going to be able to do that are practically zero, because you can use something like Cypher Maniac's Codebreaking to stack your deck, or Team Stargrunt to stack your opponent's deck. But you can't do both at once. So yeah, card's kind of bad, but it's definitely funny.
Yeah, stacking both seems like near impossible. The consistency of having to waste your supporter as well and just stacking an energy while trying to set up like 3 energy Magcargos and also like drawing cards is kind of questionable. I mean, 280 is still a good number, so like maybe you can make this work. I think this is gonna lean more to meme deck territory, but who knows? Someone might be able to cook this up enough that it could actually be half decent.
It might be over on the Hitmonchanting channel. You never know.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be a Hitmonchanting special, to be honest.
Absolutely. And one of the cards you could play this Magcargo with is the brand new Infernape. Now, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Oh, yes, my goat. Infernape has a usable card for the first time in a while. I'm not going to say it's amazing. It kind of feels like I wish they just did Baxcalibur for either fire or fighting. They pulled basically a Colossal. There's a Colossal card that does something very similar. But it's a stage 2 one prizer that you can attach a basic fire and a basic fighting, or one of each from your hand to your Pokemon any way you like. So it's a little bit of energy acceleration for fire and fighting. It doesn't synergize perfectly with either type though. It'd work best with something like one of those types that still have a colorless cost as well. But it's also stage 2 that you have to commit to setting up, but not as strong as Baxcalibur, which is a little unfortunate. So I don't know how strong Infernape's going to be. It's probably as strong as some of the fighting and fire types that can abuse it as well. If we get something that either a lot of the player base isn't thinking about that we just figure out soon that's already released, or something that comes out a little bit later, maybe Infernape X, because then you'd play the same line and it'd synergize that way. But either way, any kind of fire or fighting type Pokemon that actually really abuses this with energy acceleration is pretty broken. I could see being pretty good. Right now, I think it's like okay.
Yeah, you definitely have like, you know, the once during your turn versus as many times as you would turn. You have to have both types of energy if you want to get maximum acceleration. Your stage 2, it's like there's all these other restrictions that definitely make it like a baseline worse card than Baxcalibur is. But as Dan said, it's like it's only as good as the attackers that surround it. And if we get a really good Infernape X or a really good fire or fighting attacker that can abuse the ability, it will see some play. It's only as good as the attackers that it has. There is this Poliwrath though that I was a hater of on first glance, but I actually do kind of like it. The jumping uppercut attack does 120 plus 120 more, and you can shuffle it back into your deck and all attached cards, which is important to do the extra 120 damage. So you can use a single double turbo, you do 220 with that, and it goes back into the deck. Pretty cool hit and run card. You do have Irida, which is awesome to set this thing up consistently over. Again though, it's a stage 2 you gotta constantly put into play. I don't know how good it will be, but I definitely think it's a fun kind of archetype hit and run deck to try.
Something I like about this is it's quite a strong stat stick for being a one prizer. In like standard meta, it's probably still going to be a little tough. You can do some interesting things though. Like, you know, 220 for 1 energy on a, well, I guess the one prize doesn't matter because we're shuffling, but 220 for 1 energy, that's recyclable. You can hit and run strategy and push things like Mimikyu, Fluttermane, Klefki, things that are really annoying for your opponent to deal with, which also in turn buy you time to like afford missing a turn here and there, whether it be at the beginning when we're setting up, or you know, we're just having a little bit of difficulty in the mid to late game chaining Poliwraths that consistently. So those Pokemon are decent. I could see being an interesting deck. Something like GLC as an alternate format, I could see this card being pretty good in too.
Now there's this new Milotic as well that I've actually been seeing on the Twitter.coms. People are like putting into certain decks, which I think is really funny. He's got an interesting ability. I personally don't know how good this card is, but what do you think?
It just seems really niche to include a stage 1 line like this. Your opponent's Pokemon in play and the cards attached to those Pokemon can't be returned to their hand. It's like, how much are we really doing that? The best thing I can think of is a control deck. So you put this so that way your opponent can't penny or Turo up Pokemon. That seems like the best use for this. And there might be some merit there to go back to like a traditional block lax, because it's not very good right now with the amount of Turo stuff like Charizard's playing. So you could do this to stop things from being able to move in a control archetype. It could be pretty good there. I think it depends what the field kind of looks like though, because it's 2 cards evolution that you have to commit to that is still relatively niche, so it sort of depends how decks are being built.
Yeah, I mean, if we continue to see this like updated Charizard list with like all that stuff, if we continue to see anything like that going forward, which is going to just kind of depend if control actually stays on top as an archetype or not, then I can see it kind of being a cycle, whereas if that version's doing good, you put the Milotic in and then they change away from it and potentially iter a route to beat you as control. I don't know. It's definitely going to be like a situational tech card that I think for one tournament is going to catch people by surprise and time the meta right, and it'll probably do very well. And then after that, people are going to expect it and it's not going to do very well. I think that's kind of how the spot that this card fits in.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of putting it. Something I'd say is like, it's the kind of thing where on release, I probably would pick up one or two. You might use it, you might not, but it's like probably worth having.
Yeah. And this is a card I'm definitely more hopeful for in terms of a fun card, and also in terms of, I think, a card that has a really strong effect. This Froslass with Freezing Curtain. It's during Pokemon Checkup, you put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon in play with an ability except any Frost. So you can ping things down like your opponent's Manaphy, like their Jirachis, even Bidoof and Bibarel. They both have abilities. You can slowly accumulate damage on them over time by having one of these in play. Now, I don't know if this card has a place as a 1/1 line, as a stage 1 in different decks, because, you know, it's kind of like Shrine of Punishment, I believe, from the Sun and Moon era, but Shrine of Punishment is a stadium, so you just throw it down and then it works. Here, you gotta evolve into it. Your opponent's gotta be playing ability Pokemon, and they gotta, you know, not KO it. There's a lot more going into this card in terms of investment, but what do you think? Do you think, like, this effect, I think, is strong, but do you think it's worth even, like, putting this into play?
I think it's an interesting effect that over, like, 2-3 years of legality could definitely find use. I don't know what that would look like right now. You gotta find the right card that either really needs the number fixing or has good synergy because it doesn't have an ability and can afford to fit this. They can also stack, so it's like it's a lot of effort to set up a bunch of them, but you also get a lot more value out of it. I think it's significantly worse than something like Shrine was, considering it was a stadium, way easier to put into play. And also the power scaling over time, like it's still 1 damage counter, feels a lot worse. Like 2 damage counters would probably make this a lot better. There's potential here. I just don't know what we're playing it with right now.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a Froslass EX. Unfortunately, that card is, like, really bad. It doesn't really do anything that synergizes with this, which, you know, kind of sucks. I mean, I think that would be cool if they had a little bit more of a synergy, but that card, low damage, is, you know, you've probably never even heard of it if you don't, like, know, if you haven't been paying attention, you know, in the past sets, you probably wouldn't even know it existed. But Froslass, as you know, a new Pokemon, new card, definitely has potential. But a card I think, and I'm sure you will agree, has a lot more potential and can actually make some waves in the game is this Palafin. I'll let you take it away, explaining kind of the whole gimmick of it, but I want to hear, like, your initial thoughts on this card right up the gate.
Yeah, okay, so this card got revealed. I saw stage 1, 340 HP, 1 energy, 250, and I thought this card's absolutely nuts. Then I considered it a little bit more, and I still think the card is good, but I don't think it's broken like I, you know, threw my phone freaking out when it got revealed crazy good. Something to consider is it is a stage 1, but the way you put it into play, which I do actually like, it's very fitting of game mechanics. I really like when niche mechanics from the video game are translated well into the TCG, so shout out to the designers for that. I really appreciate that. But you have to put it into play with the effect of the baby Palafin's ability, which means you need to play that Palafin and basically a comparable line. So first off, in deck space, it's going to take basically like a stage 2's space. It's probably a little easier to put in play than a stage 2 still, but you still need to build around it. I think you need to play switches to effectively set this up cleanly. And then 340 HP is really good. That's kind of just undisputedly amazing. Although the typing is a little weak for a bulky Pokemon. Water's not the best defensive type in the TCG because electric or lightning, I guess, tends to be pretty good. There's usually a lot of counters when a water type's really strong. And then 1 energy, really nice. 250 is an okay number. It feels like that's a touch low for almost the effort you're putting in, because, okay, you can never really get one shot outside of weakness, but are we actually one-shotting that much? With a choice belt, you go V-stars, but you're really not even close to, like, a lot of the important EXs. So it feels like that number could be even slightly lower, and it doesn't change much. It feels like it wants to be slightly higher to be able to put in real big damage numbers. So, and it also can't attack next turn. So it's like you have this stat stick that is really good, but you need a little bit more than surface level seeming resources to set it up. And then I don't actually know how much more value you get out of it than any other Pokemon that's like relatively close to that HP and is a traditional two-shotting Pokemon.
Now, another card, another EX that I am actually, I really like. I actually really like the design of this card. I think this card's really sick. I think that Pokemon's definitely leaning into more Control E cards now, noticeably more than they have in the past. I think they're trying to make, and continue to have Control be a little bit of an archetype, or at least disruption decks be a thing, instead of just a bunch of decks going, okay, I'll hit you turn after turn and we'll see who wins. I think there's a lot more room for that. This Luxray with Piercing Glint, that's the star of the show. You're doing 120 for 2 colorless energy. Then you look at your opponent's hand and discard any one card you find there. This is on a stage 2 though, so what do you think of this card in terms of itself being a control card? Can it be its own thing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different uses you can play Luxray. You can play it as its own archetype, or you can slot it into other things like control-esque decks. Something like Pidgeot Control, it's already playing rare candies, I could see. So Piercing Glint is stronger effect for sure than Luxray V, but it's definitely comparable. So I'm gonna kind of go back and forth between those two cards. So they're both double colorless. This is any card you find in your opponent's hand, and it's also more damage. So it's considerably stronger effect, but it is also a stage 2, which there's a few problems there. You need rare candy to put it initially into play. It doesn't work as well with some of the HP boosting cards. Like obviously you can just chuck Hero's Cape on here, but you can't cycle something like Bravery Charm. So something like Luxray V at 210 HP can be buffed up to 260, which isn't that far off anymore from this card. And then you can do things like Penny Loop it to just fully clean it off. So I think as a control card, it's possible Luxray V is still just better, which is a big consideration. The damage is definitely there as well. It depends what kind of control structure you're also building as well. Pidgeot Control, once again, is a deck that tends to actually attack. Where you want to start doing the damage is questionable. You don't tend to want to take prizes too fast. You usually want to run your opponent out of resources first. Then you start to just kind of sweep them. So yeah, I don't know how good of a control card this is. It definitely has potential in control archetype, but there's a consideration of is Luxray V just better. As its own deck, I think it's actually pretty cool. I would definitely build an archetype around this. I think it's a lot of fun because if we're playing this in particular, we're playing Lightning Energy. So there's the option to be disruptive while doing damage. And then there's also the option to just go full gas. You do have to discard all the energy, but it's still only 2 lightning. It's not bad to just do 250, which is a solid number. So you can pair the 2 attacks interchangeably based on the situation, as well as play other cards that help support it. So I think Luxray has a lot of different interesting uses that we could see it fitting into.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have scenarios where you can power this up. Then if your opponent takes a KO, because you are stage 2, you'll be a bit slower, and then you can use something like Unfair Stamp and put them down to literally turn, which is a really strong combo, especially if they haven't established an engine, or if there's something that's hyper aggressive, like Turbo Iron Hands, for example. So the card is good. I think the card's got its uses, but will it be a control card? Will it be an archetype? Probably more so an archetype, but I think definitely look out for this. I'm going to be picking up some copies to have it in my collection. And another lightning type card that's really disruptive. We got 2 of them in this set, which is really funny. Iron Thorns, which I think is in contention for being one of the best cards in the set. I think the ability's really, really strong. Obviously, these effects are always really strong, but I almost don't know where this card fits. So what do you think of it? What do you think of Iron?
Yeah, it's an interesting Pokemon. It almost feels like a bit of a better Empoleon V. It works quite similarly. It's got an ability locking ability while in the active. Attack damage is similar and moves in energy. I think this card is definitely better though. After losing Path to the Peak, we don't have strong rule box full-on ability lock. So having this in play is really, really strong against certain decks like Zard that are just across the board ability lock and quite difficult to get out of. You can't just bump the stadium. You actually need to move this, which is probably more work in the early turns because to be bossing and not playing something like Arven is probably going to inhibit your setup either way. And then there's of course the decks that I think this card's mainly being used just kind of with itself. for Iron Thorns, no other Pokemon. So it's just not possible to break the ability to lock outside of turning its ability off with something like canceling Cologne. Things to consider is it's a little low damage and has to move in energy, which can be both good and bad. It lets you set up your backup Pokemon, but it's also annoying if you don't have a constant stream of energy because it's for retreat. So if you're having to go attack, move an energy to the bench, and I'm starting to run out of energy on my active, I can't attach to it. It could make it so that you can't attack very well here and there, which is a little awkward. And 140 is a little bit of a low number in general. Like, you're sometimes having to 3-shot things, which is potentially giving them too much time anyways to play the game. But you can also play a lot of other disruption stuff in the deck if you're playing 4 Thorns, because we have 56 cards to work with. So there's still a lot of room there for other disruption things. And then the other case is you could just stick 1 or 2 of these in Future Box and give it a lot more depth as a deck.
Yeah, I think this deck actually got top 8, I think, at a Champions League. Aichi, I think it was. And it was literally just quad Thorns and disruption things. Played Crushing Hammer, played Airy, played a bunch of disruption cards. And that was upon the card's release in Japan. So I think that's probably the better way to do this, but the card is really good. You can play it in turbo hands like Dan said. Give that archetype a little bit more to work with. And yeah, the card's just really solid, so look out for it. I think it's definitely going to see a lot of play, and we'll see people, I think, change a little bit on how they're building decks if the card obviously popular. We'll see Canceling Cologne come through to stop this ability, completely deleting your entire stuff. But yeah, a really good card. A card that I think is definitely less good, also a lightning type Pokemon, is this Morpeko. He's a cute little guy, and that's like kind of the whole reason I wanted to show this card. The art is really nice, but the snack search ability is interesting. At the very least, you just look at the top card of your deck, then you may discard it. The only thing, we have a Stadium that does the exact same thing, and that doesn't even see play.
Yeah.
This effect isn't really good. You could play this with like Magcargo to potentially do 480 or 420 damage, whatever, but the card itself, not that great. Again, I don't even know throughout the history of the game, does this effect really have any place? Has it really ever been good?
I know there's a Sableye actually that I play in Dark GLC that does a very similar thing, but in Standard I'm not sure if it's ever been that good. I didn't play at that card's Standard legality time. I'm not really sure if this effect has ever been good. In the modern age, I can't see it being that useful. Like you mentioned, Stadium does the same thing. That card's like full meme. Like, you know, we played in Curum VMAX maybe. Magcargo EX to like check if we got an energy on there. Probably just a lot of like meme potential to look at the top deck, but it doesn't actually let you manipulate your top deck like that heavily. It's not like Cypher Maniac where you actually get to choose the cards on there and then potentially draw into good cards. It's literally just look, is this a good card? Okay, I can discard it if it's not, but I can't do a whole lot with that.
Another card that I wanted to actually mention, this is a Hitmonchanting tier card. This Farigiraf. I love Farigiraf as a Pokemon. I love Girafarig. I love Giraffe. So that's also a little bit of bias, but the medium rumble attack is at the very least interesting. You're doing 40 damage for each of your stage 1 Pokemon in play. The only problem is that while you can use this for a single double turbo attachment, there's always going to be a point in the game where you have one less stage 1 Pokemon in play. So you're not even hitting the maximum number that you can be doing. If they knock out a Farigiraf, you can't throw a stage 1 back in. It's not like, you know, we have a stage 1 that comes in from the discard pile. Like there's the Lost Origin Gengar, but that's a stage 2. So we don't have any effect like that. So this card I was really hyped for. Initial reaction was it was really cool, but upon realizing that, you know, it's very kind of meme potential, I wish you could have a good single price deck.
Yeah, I don't know if there's much else to say about that. It's like you can hit probably 220 with DTE if you had 6 stage 1s in play, but consistency of doing that like turn 2 seems almost impossible. Like that is so much. And then from there, because you're a 1 prize attacking deck, you're almost probably never gonna be, unless your opponent's missing, you know, beats here and there.
There is this new Streamtail EX, which I love the art on this card, and I love the effect of its attack, but I don't think this is very good, and I feel like that's the general consensus, but I kind of want to know what you think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, it's got a little bit of utility there. The first attack's obviously the key interest. You can use this attack only if you go second, and only during your first turn. During your opponent's next turn, they can't play any supporter cards. So you can go second. Your opponent went first. They didn't get to play a supporter turn 1. Then you lock them out of a supporter turn 2 as well. You make it so that they're pretty behind in setup, and from there, I guess you can potentially just like outboard state them. Like you're too far ahead. They need too much time to recover, and you just get ahead on prizes. And then Crunch is a little bit of utility. 120, discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. A little bit of disruption. The closest thing I could see this being okay in is something like Gardevoir. But I think, first off, Sudden Shriek is like kind of niche. It's like, okay, we'd love that effect if it was really easy to do just to disrupt our opponents. But like, let's think about it. We need to play a low HP 2 Prizer in our deck. And then if you actually think about the fact that you have to use this attack turn 1, and a lot of energy acceleration is not really available turn 1, you basically have to start this because, or you have to play a switching card to get this into the active, because we need it in the active to attack. We can't attach retreat to something to get this in because now we don't have attach return to this to attack. So even in the case of like we get to pull it off, we need to commit a lot to it. And then it's like, is that really worth it? Probably very rarely going to be able to do it and be worth it.
Yeah, like even decks like Gardevoir, you're going to go second. You're probably going to want Evo anyway. In a deck like Charizard or Control, you'd probably still want to just instant charge anyway, or Grasping Draw. The effect of the attack, it doesn't help you, it just stops your opponent, and then you have this liability sitting on your bench for a couple turns at the very end. Like Dan said, you got to commit a lot to it. So I think like the effect is really cool. I don't think the card is going to really make a lot of waves. I don't think it's going to see but I mean, it's an ancient Pokemon. If there's ever some sort of other ancient disruption cards, maybe a future Fluttermane EX can maybe have some synergy. Don't really know, but for now, this is going to be a binder sitter if you ever happen to get one. And some other Psychic type Pokemon that we have, I think, are interesting and have more potential to actually be good. There's the new Munkidori. With the Adrenaline Power ability, you can attach a Dark Energy to it, and then once during your turn, you can move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And this is like a good effect, but I think the big problem with this card is how are you going to effectively use it? You got to, like, in every sense, you got to attach on this Munkidori. So if your deck doesn't have any other energy acceleration, you're losing an attachment, and then at that point is moving 3 damage counters really.
Yeah, I actually was talking to someone on Twitter about this card today, debating whether it's good or not. I think the effect is really good because you're simultaneously healing 30 from one of your Pokemon and then gaining 30 damage against your opponent's Pokemon. So that's really good number fixing. I'm sure that'll swing things in certain decks. Having the damage on your Pokemon is probably a little hard to manipulate. I don't think we're going over the top with that. That's probably just going to rely on your opponent punching into it. But regardless, heal 30 and then deal 30 as well is pretty good. The main thing is, like, we have to commit the energy to it. And it's a dark energy too. It's not even like a neutral energy. Like, if there's any energy on it, it does this. So you need to play something like a luminous energy to slot this into like any kind of deck neutrally. Or if you're playing a dark type deck, it might fit a little bit better there. But if we don't have energy acceleration, there's also the issue of we have to waste the attach for turn on this. And if it's enough of an issue, your opponent can always just gust kill it. And we've just wasted an energy commitment on this Pokemon for not a lot of value. I think this can see value if it sticks around for a long time. So it needs to be in something that can make use of potential energy acceleration that fits with the dark typing for this Pokemon's ability. And then it could maybe see some good use in a deck where that number fixing really matters.
There's another one of these, the Toxic Trio or whatever they're called. I don't even know what they're is. But we have...
I think they're called the Loyal 3.
The Loyal 3, that's it. Yeah.
I could be completely wrong and making something up, but I think that's what they're called.
I think you're right. I didn't finish the DLC yet, but that sounds familiar enough. So we have Loyal number 2 out of 3. Fezandipiti here, probably one of the coolest names, with the Adrenaline Pheromones ability, which is, again, I think it's a good ability on first glance. If you have any dark energy attached to it, and if any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, you flip a coin, and if heads, you prevent that damage. Now, something I've seen a lot of people say is, oh, its attack energy feathers, 30 times the amount of energy attached to this Pokemon. It's a psychic type Pokemon. We can play this in Gardevoir. And you absolutely can. I mean, it's got 120 HP, but you can put not Cape of Toughness, a Bravery Charm or a Hero's Cape on it. Gardevoir is already playing those cards right now, but then you still have to play a Dark Energy or a Luminous Energy, and Luminous can't be accelerated with Gardevoir's ability because it's not just a Psychic Energy. So I get kind of what people are thinking with this card, but I almost don't really see the hype.
Yeah, I don't think it's that great. The ability is good in the context of like a Pokemon that's gonna reasonably have a Dark Energy on it and is actually a good Pokemon worth using. I don't think this Pokemon's that strong. In something like Gardevoir would be the best case of it. I think Drifloon just scales better. So like, why would we use this?
Yeah, and then couple that with the fact, if you put a Dark Energy on it and you put a Bonnet, your opponent can still vacuum the tool away and KO you. So, are we really going to go through all that effort? I don't think so. Moving on to the Fighting type Pokemon, I think we have one of the poster childs of this set, Greninja EX. And there's been a lot of debate about whether this card is good or not. It saw a little bit of results over in Japan. The first little bit that it's been out, it's been overtaken by another Stage 2 coming out in this set, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But Greninja EX has a lot of strong attributes that I think are, but not great. Do you want to go ahead with this one?
Yeah, okay, so this is one of the big ones. I think this card is good. It has a lot of potential. Duplicate Barrage at first glance is like, oh my god, they remade Urshifu. We can use Rapid Flow. But it's so much harder to pull off if you really start thinking about it. Urshifu had Rapid Strike Energy for one, which paid the cost, which of course we have DTE, but that reduces the damage. And I think 120 down to 100 is actually relevant number changing. So that's not great. And we also had Melanie, which we don't have anymore, or really a similar supporter either. So from being Rapid Flow, an attack that we could pull off in one turn of energy acceleration if we really wanted, Greninja can't do that at all. And if we want to do it within 2 attachments, it needs to be with a DTE, which the numbers are a lot worse. Baxcalibur is a consideration, but I don't think we're ever playing 2 Stage 2s in the same deck, and I think at that point Chien-Pao is just 100% better. So then we looked at Ninja Blade, which is a really good attack. For 1 energy, 170, which is 2-shotting pretty much everything, on a decent typing. And then you can search your deck for 1 card. So I think Ninja Blade is actually a pretty good attack and kind of overlooked. Probably a lot better than Duplicate Barrage. And then you kind of just have the option to be able to use Duplicate Barrage to, maybe close games against like a V-Star. You can go Ninja Blade on 2 different ones, and then Duplicate Barrage covers both of them. We do have the energy that returns to it as well, but I think that's a little hard to make use of because accelerating those on is going to require like 3 separate turns of attachments, and then we use Duplicate Barrage, we bring the energy back. It's like, how long is this Greninja sticking around for that we're going to be able to use that multiple times?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue with this card is like, we have ways to power it up. You can, it's the Boomerang Energy, I believe it's called. It's special energy coming in this set. You can use Archeops to power this up in 1 turn. But are you going to be able to do that? I don't think you are. You can use
Archeops. See, that is a commitment and a half.
Yeah, you got to put that fossil into play, or you got to play Lugia. Like,
I don't know.
I don't think that's going to happen. You can use Baxcalibur, but realistically, are you putting 2 Stage 2s into play? And that's not even considering a draw engine. That's just your attacker and your energy accelerator. Like, is that realistically going to happen? I don't think so. But Ninja Blade, I think, is an attack that's too strong to ignore. It can give you opportunity to do a lot of combo plays. You can use Ninja Blade and Pidgeot every turn and get 2 cards from your deck, throughout the course of 2 turns, or the course of a turn, I should say, every single turn, which I think is a very strong effect. But I think the card is, it's gotta get there. People gotta build it and play with it a little bit. I think that it definitely just serves best as being Ninja Blade focused, just being able to pick out the card that's perfect for the scenario every single time, rather than focus on Duplicate Barrage. But as Dan said, it's just a good option to have. So Greninja, definitely look out for. You'll probably be seeing it played at locals, and people will probably try and bring it to regional. I think it's good enough to get there. Is it good enough to win just yet? I'm not sure. A card that I do think has potential, again, I think a lot of these Loyal 3 have potential as cards. Good effects, but I don't think they're quite as good in practice, is Okidogi. I think this takes the award for the best name for it is a fighting type dog that's really buff, and it's got the Adrenaline Power ability, which means if it has a dark energy attached to it, it gets 100 more HP, and its attacks do 100 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Now, again, really good effect of the ability, but its attack costs 2 fighting energy, which I could see this if it was a fighting and a colorless, then you could really do some damage in something like Lost Box. It could be a really good counter to like an Iron Hands that might be ruining your day, and just to do a bunch of damage and be a big tanky one prizer could be good. But the attack cost, I think, is what holds it back in this game.
Yeah, a colorless actually would have been, I think, a really good Lost Box card. There's like, I guess, merit to using this in Lost Box anyways, with like double fighting and dark, but it's just not like nearly as clean as you would have liked it to be, just like a single Mirage Gate. It's a lot more, and then at that point, I think Koopa that it plays right now is probably just better. I think 2 fighting and a dark is just too much commitment for this card. I think the best way to utilize this, if you did want to, is something like Fighting Luminous. So the Luminous is paying for the fighting energy, and it's acting as a dark type for the ability. Could be interesting there. I think is how that works, at least. I'm not even 100% sure if Luminous covers that. I'm pretty sure you can do that. I just don't know. I'm pretty sure like Fighting Luminous could be interesting. Your 230 HP one prizer, 170 damage. That could be okay. That's like a GLC application, or like if you really wanted to play an Okidogi 4 of deck, I guess. Doesn't really slot into anything very nicely though as like a 1 of.
Yeah, I think it's one of those cards that it just needed like one aspect of it changed. You make that second fighting a colorless, and you're really seeing a pretty strong. But because it's a double fighting, unless we get some other way to power this up, it's not really gonna be. There's this new Mightyena Stage 1 that is basically the same thing as Farigiraf in terms of its application, its strengths, and its weaknesses. It does have the ability, or the additional, I guess, positive of it being a dark type. Dark's generally a good type. KO psychic types for weakness. And pack outing is doing 30 plus 90 more for each of your bench Mightyena. But as we said, you need to have, 4 Mightyena in play to get max damage. One of them's going to go down. Unfortunately, Zoroark has rotated, so we can't even use that. So unless we get a similar card, Mightyena's pretty bad.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I actually think this card would have been so much stronger if Zoroark was not rotated, because you could probably loop this a lot cleaner and be doing 300 damage consistently. But because we don't have Zoroark, and we run into the same problem as Farigiraf, where after your opponent knocks out 1, we can never have all 4 Mightyena in play consistently, which we're always gonna have, even if we recover it immediately, 1 that was just benched as a pooch and can't evolve up yet. So it just becomes a little meh. So, I mean, if you can string even 2 of them on the bench while putting a pooch back in play, like, we could still be doing okay damage. That's 210 for 1 energy. But I think also looping the Mightyenas that often, like, we're going to be super rotting a 1/1 line back every time to be able to pull this off, is just a lot. Yeah. Probably not worth the effort.
As for other dark type single prizers here, there is a Brute Bonnet that I'm pretty much only mentioning because it's an ancient Pokemon. You can use Dark Patch, you can use Sada to power it up. The attack is has uses. It does 50 more damage for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. But with ancient Pokemon already, you have Roaring Moon EX. For 3 energy, you could just instantly KO that Pokemon. So are we really going to commit 3 energy to a Brute Bonnet? We're Baby Roaring Moon.
Yeah, there's definitely that argument. Moon is a 2-prizer, and Frenzied Gouging puts it to like 30 HP left. 3 energy is kind of a high commitment to the Bonnets, but if we do get to the range of like one-shotting things, it could be decent. Like, we have Sada and Dark Patch, so there is a possibility of powering up the Dark type Brute Bonnet. Something interesting is this could be a Pokemon I could see being paired pretty well with the Froslass. That's a way of putting damage counters, because this actually scales quite hard. 50 per damage counter. Froslass in play for a couple turns. Even if we have multiple, like 2 Froslass within a couple turns, we start to hit any ability Pokemon for serious damage. So there's some application there. I could see it being an okay attacker. Tier 1, probably not.
Yeah, it does have its applications, and who knows, maybe it will actually make waves. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it definitely, there is ways that it can work. I never considered the Froslass, so that's a good shout there for sure. And now we're getting to, I think, some of the best cards in this set at the Dragon typing. We're starting off with Drakloak here, which is on par to, I think, its Stage 2 counterpart, if not better in general, but both are really good. Drakloak has the Telling Spirit ability, which is airmail if you've played before, but if you haven't, it lets you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and you pick one at the bottom of your deck. Then, its evolution is Dragapult EX, and Phantom Dive for a Fire and Psychic. You're doing 200, and then you're putting 6 damage counters on your Pokemon in any way you like. So, a really good line. This is a Stage 2, but you're a Dragon type. You have no weakness. You got a really good Stage 1 line. I think, we're really seeing a Tier 1 card right here, Tier 1 archetype, most likely. What do you think about this card on first glance and, like, the implications it could have?
Yeah, I think Dragapult and Drakloak both obviously in the same deck, but also separately. Drakloak is just really good. Airmail is really good utility. You can build probably pretty good control engines around this. That's kind of how Airmail was used. Pidge control, take 2. We're gonna have double Pidge control in Spirit in Standard apparently. Yeah, Drakloak's really good as an engine. For Dragapult, as a Stage 2, it's pretty good, similar to Gardevoir, that its Stage 1 does have a really powerful engine that's going to help it be rather consistent as a Stage 2. And then the attack, 200, and then you spread 6 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon any way you like. It's not blocked by Jirachi. It's not a basic Pokemon, so that does not work. 6 spread is quite a lot when you're also 2-shotting the active. That starts to build up really fast in terms of being good bench damage to be picking off 1-prizers. Fire Psychic feels like it's an odd energy combo, but you start to think about the amount of options that we have, and it being Fire Psychic actually enables it to be played in a lot of different ways rather than it being a hindrance, which is really interesting. There's Xatu, there's Charizard EX, there's a couple other things. You can power it up with Neo Upper Energy if you really wanted to. As well, but I'm sure you can also play other aspects because we've got energy acceleration on both sides of the types. So yeah, Dragapult's really good. Also, Dragon type, no weakness, Stage 2, which means as this card is probably going to be pretty good, it's also kind of hard to counter because it's like, what do we do? I don't even know if Devo's going to be working that strong because we're probably going to be wanting to put the Stage 1s in play. So we're probably unaffected by that. We don't have a weakness, so we can't just type metagame it. Dragapult's probably really good. It's one of those cards that I looked at it and I think a lot of people thought it was like good but maybe not great. I thought it was like probably seriously good, and I almost wish it didn't catch on as much. And then Japan had their tournaments, first time this card was legal, and it won like more than half of a lot of relatively big tournaments in the first weekend that it was released, and I think everyone now realizes this card is crazy.
Yeah, like it's one of those cards that, like, you mentioned Neo Upper Energy. We have maybe 5 ways off the top of my head I can think to power this thing up. And this thing's got no weakness, 320 HP. You can hit into it. We'll just play the new Scoop Up Ace spec that they reprinted. Scoop Up Cyclone, we can reset it. Keep all those energies, power another one up with Xatu, put it back down. That's just, I think, one of the, like, many applications where this card can be good with a combination of other cards. This card in combination with Unfair Stamp. You can reset your opponent's hand after they knock out one of your Dreepy, then you can Phantom Dive and potentially take out one of their support Pokemon if they didn't get a good setup. You can play something like Hero's Cape, make this have 420 HP and no weakness, so some decks might not even be able to 2-shot it depending what you're... Like, there's a lot of crazy applications that Dragapult enables, not even mentioning the 6 damage counter spread, which is really strong. You can play this with, like, Radiant Alakazam to move some damage off the active right onto your bench. That's effective 8 damage counters every turn after your first attack that you get to spread wherever you want for basically free. Like, it's kind of crazy. The fact that you can't just immediately is a bit concerning.
Yeah, I love how flexible the card is and how many different ways you could potentially play it, and it almost feels like it has nothing going wrong for it, which is almost a little bit concerning, but I think this card is definitely really good. Probably the best Pokemon line in the set for sure. Probably like top 3 cards in the set, honestly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If you're going to pre-releases, which are coming up soon, and you happen to get these, I think hold on to them, because in terms of other dragon types, we have another really strong dragon type, which I think is also in contention for being one of the best cards in the set. Maybe not top 3, I think maybe like top 5. But yeah, Tatsugiri, what do you think about Tatsugiri?
Yeah, it's kind of like similar support basic Pokemon that we've seen in the past with things like Jirachi, Mew. I think this is slightly weaker than those ones have been in the past. I think this card's still really good. You can just chuck it up in the active with a board. It's got free retreat. You can just use it to find a supporter pretty easily every turn and then pivot it out. But I think finding specifically a supporter rather than things like an item limit how flexible it is, because you can only play one supporter per turn. So it doesn't always add a ton of extra consistency or utility when you just have the supporter you want in hand. Whereas things like Jirachi and Mew used to be able to find like items that you could use extras of. And I think those just gave him a little bit better utility. But I think Tatsugiri is still really good. I'm not gonna lie, I think it's like a touch overhyped for what a lot of people are saying. I've seen a lot of takes of like best card in the set, second best card in the set. I'd say closer to, I agree with Mr. Hitmonchanting here, like maybe top 5. It's a good card for sure.
Yeah, the thing that Dan said is pretty spot on. Like, if you have a supporter in your hand, you're not gaining value out of it. It's only getting you out. I mean, there's, I think, always a, getting to dig an extra 6 cards. Like, you get a free Pokegear out of your active pivot. Always good. You can still find something, find an Arven a lot easier. But you could also make the argument you could just play Pokegear, which is an item. You can play multiple of it. So you can potentially have a little bit of a better chance of finding things throughout the game. You don't need to dedicate a bench spot. There's arguments against this card, and I don't think it's as good as Mew. Now we have the colorless EXs of the set. My personal favorite is Blissey. I'm a huge fan of this card. I really like it. 300 HP stage 1. We're reaching Palafin territory there, We're getting up there. It's got a good ability in Happy Switch. You can move a basic energy from one of your Pokemon to another one of your Pokemon. And its attack return is also just general good stats. For 3 energy, you're doing 180. And then you may draw cards so you have 6 cards in your hand. Now, Blissey, the obvious combos are like Sharon's Care. To pick up a big Blissey, we also have the new Scoop Up Cyclone, Ace Tyrant. Return is good, built-in consistency. Every time you swing, you fill your hand to 6 cards. Pretty solid. Powering this thing up, we can use things like Magma Basin on a bench fire Pokemon, and then Happy Switch to move it to the active, attach an energy for turn, a double turbo energy, and you're swinging away. So there's ways to, I think, easily start attacking with Blissey. There's ways to easily set up a tanking loop with Blissey, with Sharon's Care, and Hero's Cape, and that kind of stuff. But what do you think about Blissey? I mean, we haven't really seen tank decks be, like, too good recently, because you have things like Chien-Pao that can just auto-scale and destroy them, and you have late-game Charizard, which can also just scale up and destroy them. But do you think that being able to loop with Sharon's Care and do reasonable damage is going to be enough for this card to actually see play?
I think Blissey could see some play. I don't know how good it'll be. It's kind of hard to say. It feels similar to Blissey V that rotated out a little bit ago, where, you've got some damage output. You can be pretty annoying. You start looping like Sharon's. There's a lot that you can do here. You got to get those initial energy into play, but then Happy Switch kind of lets you maintain the energy, because getting 3 otherwise on a Blissey that you're sort of like looping would be awkward. But you can, if you get basic energy in play, Happy Switch can keep them in play, so you're not just picking up all your energy. With Sharon's, 300 HP is already a lot. You can put Hero's Cape that you can loop, because, the Hero's Cape is going to come with a Sharon, as long as it doesn't get vacuumed or blown up, but they still going to have to reach 400 damage to do that. So there's a lot of good card combos here. The only thing is you can't just loop Sharon's forever. Like, we have to find the Sharon's. So you got to probably be doing other things in the meantime. If you're attacking with the DTE, 160 is a significantly worse number than 180. So that's worth mentioning as well. And to be able to use 3 basic energy on this is a lot more effort.
Yeah,
but it's also got that Chansey, which is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, my favorite card from 151, where if you pull it off the prizes, you can put it on your bench and flip a coin, and if you get heads, you take an extra prize. So this Blissey has built-in funny. It has built-in funny and silly in its core engine, which I don't know. It makes me love it even more. It makes me love it even more.
There's a lot of fun things you can do with this card. I don't know how I feel about it right now. It's like you could make it work though. I'm sure there's a lot you can do with it.
I mean, then there's the also added thing, you know, colorless type. It's weak to fighting. If Greninja ends up being really good, it just flat out destroys Blissey. For 1 energy, it's getting destroyed. So in that case, we don't have any like weakness negating cards right now. Like we don't have weakness guard energy. We don't have that Dunsparce that got rid of colorless Pokemon's weakness that rotated out Infusion Strike. So you can't really do anything like that with the CEX. So that's going to depend on that as well. But it's got the tools to be good. One of the cards though that I think is almost universally agreed upon that it's going to be really strong is Bloodmoon Ursaluna East. The stats on this card are absolutely insane. You want to just go through like a bunch of applications of it?
Yeah, this card's really strong. Very Radzard reminiscent. The biggest downside, and almost feels like the only downside of this card, is 240 is a very different number than 250. So it's going to be hitting less thresholds that are sometimes important than Radzard. It's not a Radiant. So, you know, we can still play something like Radiant Greninja and use this card. So there's a lot we can do with it. 260 HP, really bulky. There's a chance that you can use this in subsequent turns. It doesn't get knocked out. It can attack, but if you just switch it back in, you can attack with it again. It might not even get knocked out when you use it. In the late game, you can use it for 1 to potentially even 0 energy. Another thing, like Radzard is always going to need 1 energy. Once your opponents hit 2 prize cards remaining, it just becomes 1 fire energy. Ursaluna is 1 energy, and then when they hit 1 prize card, it's free. And colorless also means you can slot it into just any deck. Like I mentioned, it's not a Radiant, so you can use it with Radiant Greninja, which means really good card in Lost Box to basically finally be able to play something like Radiant Greninja and Radiant Charizard, which is all my hopes and dreams come true since Lost Origin released. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I think there's a lot of applications for this deck. You could literally slot it into anything. Another archetype usage outside of Lost Box in particular, something like Arceus decks tend to struggle dealing with aggressive basic decks like POW. After they use their Max Belt, they kind of run out of options of Okos. But you can do something like a Max Belt Arc, charge up your Giratina, you have Lost Impact, and then at the end of the game you have like a 1 energy Blood Moon, and then you can get another 2 prizer off that. There's so many things that I can't cover, but there's a lot of stuff going right with this card. 260 on a basic is also huge.
It's colorless, you can use it in any deck. If you to tank a hit, you can use something like Sharon's or Penny or Turo in a control archetype. You can play this in Lugia, Lost Box. Play it in Charizard if you wanted to play a different Radiant that was Charizard. You could play, what's it called? In Arceus decks. Literally the fact that it can slot into anything, it's tanky enough. 260 HP is a huge number on a basic. You throw it down, it can even stall for a turn and you're doing 240, which is a lot of damage. I think the universal appeal of the card is too good to ignore. Do you think, Dan, is this your like #1 card of the set? Do you think that this is the best card?
It's up there, but there's one more problem coming out of this set that we're gonna get to soon, and I think that card's #1.
Yeah,
I'll mention it when we get there.
I'm gonna agree with you, but we'll keep the viewers in suspense until we get there. We have a couple of really awesome trainers to kind of rapid fire through. This one's a reprint, Enhanced Hammer. Pretty big reprint. It's just a flat discarding of a special energy attached to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Really good if you're trying to deal with missed energy, if that's preventing your game plan of doing a frenzied gouging. You can Enhanced Hammer it away. It's an item card, so you can play other stadiums that aren't Temple of Sinnoh. So good value. Enhanced Hammer, I think, has its own little niche. Not like super good, not super bad. I think it's kind of just a great
Yeah, I think it's been traditionally good, which is why it caught a lot of people's eye when it got reprinted. I actually think it's worse right now. It's as good as the special energy in format, and I don't think we actually have special energy as badly that need discarding. At the time, this card was really good. DCE, double colorless energy, which is similar to DTE, just without the damage reduction, was really prevalent, but also like a really core energy. DTE is only like a big deal if you E-hammer away like a DT off on Arceus turn 1. Outside of that, it's not like that demanding. Whereas DCE was like, we're not playing that many energy. This is our core energy. This runs the deck. We're discarding them. That's really impactful. And we also have Temple of Sinnoh right now, which is like, yeah, we can play a different stadium, but if it's just we want to remove the effect of the special energy for the turn, like a mist energy that's being pesky, we can just drop Sinnoh down and then Oko, and then there's a chance Sinnoh stays in play and we get more value out of that later.
That is also very true. That's okay. I mean, there's not a lot of stadium bumping happening right now. A lot of decks are playing like one Lost Vacuum, one Stadium. So the chances that a Temple of Sinnoh sticks on a crucial when your opponent might need to use a Lost Vacuum to get rid of a tool, decently high. So I think you're actually probably right. You definitely get more value out of Temple of Sinnoh. So important to keep that in mind when you're looking to deal with those special energy cards. Now, another trainer from this set is the Waking Whistle. This, what do you think? You give the thumbs down. You take it away. You take it away.
They didn't need to print this. They didn't need to print this. Yeah, like Control is in a good spot right now. I think Control decks existing are healthy for card games. Control's good enough right now, though. The only counterplay to things like Block Lax was doing things like discard a Pokemon out of your hand and then recycle it back into the deck. By printing this, not only is it RNG, which I don't like either, because it's just looking at the top 5, if the Pokemon happens to be there, like, top. But you remove the only form of counterplay of, like, keeping those liability Pokemon safe. And Control was good enough. Like, we didn't need this. It is a good card, though, for Control. Like, I'll say that. You know, in terms of the card's applicability, it's good. Like, it's pretty strong for Control. I think this actually, combined with Milotic, which stops liabilities getting off the board, probably swings Block Lax back to being really solid again. I just didn't want to see that.
Yeah, ditto is my response to that. I was just gonna say the same thing. Right now, Block Lax isn't very popular. Pidgeot Control, I think, is the dominant controller. Because I think a lot of decks are kind of tired of Block Lax, and they have a lot of ways to get rid of it. Lugia being a little bit more popular now is bad for Block Lax. Tina being good is bad for Block Lax. Zard with Turo, Palpad, and all that jazz is bad for Blocks. So Block Lax kind of fell off the face of the earth a little bit, but Waking Whistle, I definitely think swings that card right back up top. It's a card that didn't need to be printed. Block was like already annoying enough, and like Dan said, you can just completely remove any counterplay. And Control's fun when you actually have a challenge. When your opponent can kind of just play this card, and if you get RNG'd out of the game, you know, there's no way to fight it. If you keep a Pokemon in your hand, you can get it hit with Erica's Invitation. Keep a Pokemon in the discard, it can get hit with Mantine. If you keep a Pokemon in your deck, now you have Waking Whistle. So there's effectively zero way to deal with Block Lax other than lost zoning your own Pokemon, but we don't really have a way to do that, so
Yeah, not very easily. Like a one time with Vacuum in most decks, but outside of Lost Box, you're not putting a lot of cards in the Lost Zone, so it's just annoying. Yeah, it makes Block Lax good again, but I think Control overall had enough options right now, and I think Pidgeot Control's a lot more enjoyable of a deck, and I kind of wish, or hope even, that it stays on top compared to Block Lax, because this card's kind of cringe.
yeah, I with that one. We do have new support for grass types, finally. It's been a long time. We have a way to play grass Pokemon. Bug catching set, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, and you can choose 2 in any combination of the grass type Pokemon and the grass type basic energies, and then you put them right into your hand. Now, this card, do you think this is a good card?
No.
Me neither.
Like, yeah, it's grass type support. It's not the kind of grass type support we needed.
Like, the only application I think this card is actually useful is if you're playing an Ogerpon deck with like 12 or 13 energy, because, or maybe more, maybe like 16 energy, where you can reliably find them off the top 7. But it's just top 7 cards, not consistent enough in the early game to find your basic Pokemon. You're literally just, you know, the luck of the draw to see if you can actually get set up. Even in something like Torterra, this could have helped in that, but if you only play 4 Turtwig. So, bug catching set, the chance of hitting a couple of them off the top 7, exactly the highest, not the most consistent thing. I just wish they gave grass-type Pokemon a little bit.
Yeah, it's not reliable, and it just does things that better cards do already. We have Pokemon Search, we have Energy Search in the form of Vessel. We need things like Energy Acceleration or good attackers for grass, not this.
Yeah, so bug catching set, you missed the mark, buddy. I'm sorry. We do have the supporters of the set now in Lana's Assistance. This is basically like not a soft reprint of Clara. It's like if Clara had a baby with a Super Rod. That's kind of what this is. And you put 3 in any combination of Pokemon that don't have a rule box and basic energy from your into your hand. Now people are kind of getting flashbacks of Sablezard, because Sablezard really relied on Clara, but this is definitely not the same thing, and I don't think it's enough to like give a resurgence to that archetype. But what do you think of Lana's Assistance overall? It's not really a replacement for Clara, and it's not really a replacement for Super.
Yeah, I think it's kind of mid. The fact that you can't put rule boxes back means you can't recycle things like Radiant Charizard or Blood Moon, anything like that that are like cheap basics that you'd want to just immediately reuse, especially in the late game. It still works for something like Sableye, so we could see it. If Sablezard's good enough, you can just pick up the Sableyes, put those back. But it's also one less card overall. Sure, it's any combination, but the times that we're getting 3 energy or 3 Pokemon are probably pretty rare. And we'd rather get 2 and 2, which is more cards as well. And it's limited to, non-rule box, so.
Yeah, I agree. I can't, like, the thing is, I can't really think of an archetype right now that wants to play Lana's Assistance,
Yeah, we just doesn't do a whole lot. We don't really need it.
Some cards that I do think do a whole lot, maybe not a whole lot, maybe enough, are the new Kieran and Carmine supporters. We'll start with Kieran. These combination supporter cards I always tend to be of. You can either use it as a switch, or you can use it as a 30 damage boost to your opponent's active Pokemon EX or Pokemon V. Now, I'm honestly not sure what the community's like general consensus of this card is, if it's actually that good, if it's kind of just mid. I think, getting to do a flat out 30 damage while also having some extra utility, so it's not just a dead card in some scenarios, I think is good. I don't think every deck would want to play it, but I think it can definitely help some archetypes get over that damage threshold.
Yeah, I like the option of different effects on the supporter, which is cool. Switch can be like, we really need it in a tight spot. I think you're more going to be playing it with the damage mod in mind, though. So if this really covers an archetype that wants that 30 damage, it might be worth playing because it gives you a little bit of extra utility. It's probably not more than a one of. But something like, a little sneaky damage mod where your opponent doesn't expect it could really swing things sometimes. So it could be worth it in the right deck, I think, that 30 really makes a difference.
Yeah, I was talking about earlier, Palafin. It's got general use in that deck. You can use it as a switch, which the deck needs a lot of. You can use it as a damage mod, which that deck also needs. So it's an important thing to consider. But I think of the two siblings, Carmine's definitely the best. If you're going first, you can play this card during your first turn and just discard your hand and draw. I think that it's a good tool for like turbo style decks right now. I think that like turbo decks aren't that great. I think more setup based, more turn 2, turn 3 kind of explosion of damage and setup is kind of like a better format, and it's healthier. I think for the game I like that better, but I also do like to have tools that enable fast decks to go fast, and they're just fun to use. That's where a lot of my enjoyment card. What do you think of Carmine? Is there really any use case for it right now?
I think the only really decent one is Lugia, because in the aggro decks that are like really step on the gas turn 1, those tend to want to go second because they can actually attack.
That's also
if we're going first with Carmine, we are enabling a supporter, but we're still not enabling an attack, so it doesn't really do much for us. The only reason I like it in Lugia is because we could potentially play it as high counts, and it's still sort of similar to something like a Research, which isn't a bad card. We want to go first in Lugia, and we want to get the chops in the discard, so it allows all those things. And so we could potentially play it in high counts as well. I don't think this card's very good as a one-of, because if we're ever playing it as a one-of and we want to do it first turn, we probably just have to like fish for it, which at that point it's like, why aren't we just playing Squawk? Squawk's just probably better than fish in terms of like a search for this. So I don't think it's good as a one of. I don't think it's nearly as good as something like Lily, which I've seen some comparison to. I think its only real case is something like high counts in Lugia. I could see it being decent because that deck wants to go first. It wants to discard cards.
Yeah, that's very true. I kind of negated the fact that aggro decks, yeah, not as good as my initial yapping, but I think it's definitely a card to in mind. I do think it's gonna make its waves in Lugia. I think that this card's gonna help Lugia's early consistency issues. Just if you have a hand and you might have 4 energy in your hand, it sucks to get rid of 4 energy, but Carmine will at least let you get into the game, and you might not even be able to get a Lugia down, and you might lose it. So I think Carmine will definitely have. And moving on to the tools of the set, there's just one that I want to talk about, which is the Handy Fan. An interesting card to say the least, because whenever the active Pokemon that it's attached hit from an opponent's attack, you move an energy from the attacking Pokemon to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon, which in certain decks, we're seeing some decks like Charizard go down to 6 energy, 2 Super Rod, it seems to be the nerd. And being able to manipulate and move their energies around can be powerful, but the fact that this is on a tool, I think is, something that holds this back a little bit. The effect itself might not be too great. What do you think, Dan? What do you think of the Handy Fan?
It's got some, little utility. I think something like Zard is interesting. A lot of the time, trying to strand an energy won't really work because they can just retreat it off. So, like, you can promote a Pokemon that's normally dead. Like, maybe we move an energy to Manaphy. Well, now I'll just promote Manaphy and retreat it. And we've still opened up the energy. So I guess it can kind of still act as, like, a discard in that sense. But, like, your opponent needs to swing into it. It's still kind of niche. I don't know if it's kind of hard to justify the deck space, I think, in most cases for this. But, like, yeah, sure, it's good if we could just play infinite cards and I could just get whatever I want. But we can't. So is this ever better than, like, a good card in my 60?
Yeah, that's a good point. This card is only as good as the cards that are better than it. Now, we do have, I think, the most notable stadium in Jamming Tower, which just stops tools in play. You take the lead on Jamming Tower. Do you think that this card is going to be, able to fill that disruption void, that kind of path?
No, definitely not as good as Path. It's interesting. I think there's some application for it. I could see it being a neutral one in various things. I don't know how badly we need this in any particular archetype, though. So it could just be like a split of stadiums instead of just temples. You could play this as an option in control as well, just to limit a little bit more options. It's another thing. It kind of feels similar to the tool in the same set, where it's like it could have utility. I could see it. I just don't know if it's like really worth playing.
Like, the thing is,
like we just have Lost Vacuum to just Lost Zone.
Exactly. So we get rid of the Lost Zone. You could also get rid of other stadiums in play. It's just a better card.
Yeah, I think Lost Vacuum just Lost Zones. Like, you're just gonna actually get rid of whatever problem it is, and I don't think there's more than like one tool or stadium that's really gonna be causing many decks problems. Like, the A spec, like a Hero's Cape or Max Belt, we can just get rid of that. Or like a problematic stadium, we could just bump it with something better. Or Lost Vacuum away. Like, I think Vacuum just kind of fills this. Vacuum or better stadiums kind of fill this niche better.
Yeah, I think that's, maybe when Vacuum rotates, if we don't get another tool denial and tools get a lot stronger, then maybe this card can see some play. But I think this is a card where it's like, right now we just have many, many better options. If you want to play Jamming Tower, if you're a Jamming Tower fanboy. Boomerang Energy is one of the special energy in the set that we talked about basically with Greninja, and the reason we did is because, it provides colorless energy, but when it's discarded by the effect of an attack used by the Pokemon that it's attached to, you return it from the discard pile back to that Pokemon. Now, in Greninja, you have to manually attach, but if you're using something like Lugia, I don't think there's ever a reason to play Boomerang, and because no cards are really
Yeah, Lugia was my thought as well, outside of being like a niche Greninja use of the application of this card. I just don't know if there's merit to it right now. Maybe if we get something like a Chinchino that's like a really strong one-prize attacker, but energy heavy, and it discards energy, like we can load up Boomerang energies, but then the Pokemon can always still just get killed. So it's probably just a Greninja only card to fit trying to reuse the spread attack more than once, and that's probably about it right now, I think, that I can think of at least.
Yeah, like, I think the card is good, the concept is good and can be strong, but it's only as strong as the cards that can use it. And now we're on to the ace specs. That's how we're closing this out. And
yeah, there's some good ones in here.
there's, I don't know, probably a better selection of ace specs, I think, overall, than Temporal Forces. I'm gonna start swinging. Unfair Stamp. This is my number one card in the set. I think it is yours as well. The best card. And why don't you explain to the lovely people why this card is so unfair?
This is enemy number one right here. You can play this card at any point that your Pokemon was knocked out. So it doesn't need to be something like Roxanne in the late game where your opponent needs to dip into the like 3 or lower prize range. You can play the card if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. That's it. So your opponent could have knocked out, they could have gone first. On their turn 2, they knock out a 1 prizer. If their board's not impeccable, you immediately unfair stamp them, and they're put at 2 cards in hand. And then you draw 5, and it's an item. So our opponent's been put to nothing for barely doing anything, and we've drawn a decent amount of cards on an item. Like turn 2, it's just so strong. Like there's so many powerful disruption capabilities. It's not even close to something like Iono where, you know, Iono in the late game to 1, but like we're also drawing 1, so we're not drawing a lot of cards. That's also our supporter for turn. Our opponents had plenty of time to play around these supporters. It's so much more powerful disruption at a way earlier point, to the level of like your opponent almost considering maybe not wanting to attack on turn 2 to take an initial single prize just because they can get punished so hard for it.
Yeah, this card is bonkers. It's really, really strong. And because it's not a supporter, you can use this. If your opponent only set up 1 Bibarel, congratulations. It's getting bossed and KO'd, and you're getting
exactly.
Stamped. It's like, this is unfair. It really is unfair. Do you like the card though? Do you think that it's like a good card for the game or a bad card for the game?
I think having these things like Counter Catcher, Iono, I think is a much better card than something like Marnie, are good. I'm afraid Unfair Stamp was pushed to too high of a power level, because like your opponent goes first, takes the first prize of the game. I go Counter Catcher, Unfair Stamp. I haven't even played my supporter for turn, and I've done like a billion things, and I've like, you know, shut them out of the game if their board wasn't just crazy good. So I'm just slightly worried that Unfair Stamp is like too high of a power level. The one good thing is we actually have like other really strong ace specs, like Prime Catcher, that, you know, we might not always just be opting to play Unfair Stamp. We might play other things that are really high power level for ourselves rather than disrupting our opponent. But yeah, I think the card could be a problem. I'm a little scared.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think Prime Catcher is a more generally strong card. You can throw Prime Catcher into any deck and have it CB. I don't know if you can do quite the same thing with this. Decks like Charizard, which can instantly out. Decks like Gardevoir, which have a very strong draw engine on turn 2. They can chain Curlias, and they're playing Arbor, they can just play it to disrupt you. I think they have a lot more merit to play Unfair Stamp, but I do think the card is really, really strong, and like Dan said, it's kind of pushed over, you know, comeback mechanics are good. I'm happy for that. But you've kind of extended past that threshold a little bit to where it's like, okay, how do we even be aggressive? You need to have a balance of everything, and maybe Unfair Stamp has taken it a little bit far. Not to even mention that, you know, other different facets of the Pokemon TCG can't even stop Unfair Stamp on turn 2. You can't thin your deck to really play around it. If you take a prize card, you're screwed, pretty much. If your opponent has it, and you haven't gotten set up, there's really not much you can do other than opt to knock, which can be seen as good. You know, aggro decks are going to be a little more scared because they usually don't tend to have the strongest draw engines. So that could be a good thing if you're a really big stage 2 lover. I'm a big stage 2 lover myself. But at the same time, it's like you need different decks in the format. You can't just be all aggro or all stage 2. I think personally it's got to be a healthy balance of everything in order for the game to be very fun. So Unfair Stamp might have just pushed that.
Oh, we'll see. Who knows? See. It might just be really strong, but hopefully not problematic broken.
We could have another Prime Catcher Twitter situation. Who knows?
Yeah.
An ace spec that's significantly less powerful and we won't spend too much time on is Hyper Aroma. You can search your deck for 3 stage 1. good card. It's a good effect. Is it worth being your ace spec? I don't think it is. I think that this is just like one of the worst ace specs printed, to be honest. It's
Yeah, I agree.
yeah, there's not really much more to say. You can play it in Goldengo, you can play it in Gardevoir, but those decks just would rather play other ace specs because they're stronger.
Yeah, as just a neutral card, it's like fine. I don't even think it's that incredible, but it's like it's okay. But for every ace spec, you have to be even more critical than a normal card, because you're not asking yourself, is this worth the like slot for like one slot in my 60 cards? Is it worth the ace spec slot? So you have to compare it to the best ones. Is this ever better than something like Unfair Stamp, Prime Catcher? No.
No.
There's no way. There's no way it is. So like the cost of playing this card over something that's so much better is just never worth it.
Yeah, I don't think this card will ever really see play. There's way better alternatives for every deck in the... something else that I would kind of put in this category, just maybe a little bit better, is the secret box. The box of mystery and the box of wonder. Yeah, what do you think about the secret box?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, it gets a whole lot of stuff, but like, I don't even know if there's a case where like we need every single one of these things at the same time. And it still doesn't even get every type of card in the game, right? Like, it misses supporter. Oh no, it gets supporter.
Yeah.
Sorry, it misses Pokemon.
This is Pokemon and energy, which is like,
energy.
Pretty bad.
So it covers most of the different card types in the game, but it still misses a couple. And I feel like it's kind of rare that you need one of every single variation of trainer card in the game all at once. And then we just rise the same issue of like, yeah, it's a decent search card for a bunch of different trainer utility, but like, it's an ace spec. Not worth.
And even as a card on its own, you know, I think it's a cool card. You can discard 3 cards from your hand. Something like Lugia loves to discard cards. But Lugia doesn't really need an item, a tool, a supporter, and a stadium. Second thing, how are you finding the secret box? You can Arven for it,
Yeah.
but then you find a supporter for what? For next turn? You lose utility on finding the card. So I think as a card overall, it's just really not there. Maybe if it got a Pokemon and energy as well, you can then maybe make an argument because you can completely set up your board on a single card. But at the same time, it's like we have Ball Search, we have Energy Search. When is this really ever better? If we can't even search for it with the likes of Arven. That card, I'm not too sure about. And Survival Cast is a card I would have said is really good. And then I think it immediately gets outshined by another ace spec in this set. But what do you think of the Survival Cast? I have seen people say mixed things about this card. I'm kind of in the middle. I don't think it's great, but I think it could have.
I'm not the biggest fan. I'm sure some deck might be able to make decent use of it. I think the absolute best case is that you can get use out of this card more than once. If you can get something to live on 10. Oh, actually, no, it discards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to like recycle it then to make. I think you need more than one use out of this card. And it discards itself, which makes that immediately harder. You can use things like Silene or Roseanne's to recover it, I guess. And it's kind of got the same issue as Hero's Cape. It can always just be vacuumed away and immediately useless. I think that's a problem with the defensive A-Spec tools is they're one-ofs, they're taking your A-Spec slot, and there's always a chance they just get 0 value. So I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan of this card. I think actually in most defensive situations too, Hero's Cape's probably better.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. This used to see play. I say used to because it came out in the first half of our set in Japan. In Lugia, because you can make a Cinccino survive on 10, you preserve the energies, then you blow something else up. That was a cool use of this card, which I think is going to be completely gone now, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think Survival Cast would have been a much better ace spec if you could survive on 10 HP without being at full HP. If you had 20 HP remaining and your opponent had to swing and you would still survive on 10, I think this card would be a lot better. And you got to consider, right? It's your ace spec slot. Is this better than Prime Catcher? Is this Unfair Stamp? I don't think so.
Yeah.
The next card, which I think is kind of defensive, but also just, you know, a general use card. It's a reprint of an old one, Scoop Up Cyclone. Simple. Put one Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your hand. I think you gotta ask yourself immediately, is this better than playing the...
Yeah, I mean, it's an item, so it's definitely easier to use, but it is your A-spec slot. And it's also all cards attached. So it is the best, even not as a supporter, it is the best form of pick up a Pokemon, because Penny needs to be on a basic, Sharon needs to be on a colorless Pokemon. Turo gets anything but discards the attached cards. Scoop Up Cyclone is the only thing that gets absolutely everything unconditionally. And it's on an item, which the other three are all supporters. So there's use. It needs to be something that's really abusing this, though, I think, for it to be worth the A-spec slot still.
Yeah, I think in general that's the best. I think something like Dragapult, which has insane tank ability. I've seen lists in Japan that do play it as their A-spec of choice over something like the Neo Upper or the Unfair Stamp of the bunch. But it's got to be something that can really like benefit from the tank ability that Scoop will offer. And a lot of cards right now can't, but maybe in the future we'll get some good, and that will enable Scoop Up Cyclone to have its time in the spotlight. Now, the very last card that will, you know, leave you all with a lasting impression and that will have the legacy of this video is the Legacy Energy, which is a card I'm very excited for personally. I like this effect, and I think this card is done in like a strong and balanced way. So it's going to be fun to play, not going to be super annoying to play against, and at the same time, it's pretty strong. So why don't you start the beginning and the end here, Dan, and talk about Legacy Energy?
Okay, so it's very similar, as people notice, obviously to something like a Rainbow Energy, but also to a card that is probably sharing a lot of mixed opinions if you ever played with it, called Life Dew. And funny enough, the night before this card was revealed, I was talking with some friends about potential A-specs that they could make, like reprints, and I literally said they better not reprint Life Dew, and I woke up the next morning to this and was not happy, but they did balance it better than Life Dew. So overall, what does the card do? As long as it's attached to a Pokemon, provides every type of energy, but provides only one energy at a time. No condition Rainbow Energy. Pretty good. And then, once per game, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, your opponent takes one fewer prize card. So, one key thing is it has to be knocked out from damage. And we do actually exist in a format where knocking out from effects is relatively common, so there are ways to just entirely bypass this. An important thing they put on this, though, that even if you had ways of recovering it, like Roseanne or something, or Silene, it's once per game. So this negates your opponent taking one prize card, and that is it. You do not get this effect again. Of course, you can still use it as a Rainbow Energy again, if you wanted to recycle it. Or if you put it back in your deck, like the Water Ogerpon that we mentioned earlier, you can use that again. But you can't deny a prize card more than once, which is really good. Applications for this card, there's definitely a lot. Things like control decks that just want to deny cards and be annoying as much as possible. Deny prize cards is really good. But also, we just have a conditionless Rainbow Energy back, which we didn't actually have. Luminous was the closest thing, but the problem is Luminous didn't work with other special energies. It became a colorless. So a different special energy, even if it wasn't a Rainbow Energy, like a DTE, would then turn off Luminous as well. So you can only really use Luminous in tandem with other basic energies, or as a single energy to pay for the cost, and that's it, no other energies attached. So this works for things like mainly Lugia decks. Lugia really loves this card. It enables things like Radzard, again in Lugia, Iron Hands, Lumineon, Water Ogerpon, all without needing to play like gross basic energies with Vessel to search them out. It's so much cleaner and denies a prize card.
Yeah, I think the fact that you can play Legacy Energy in Lugia with Iron Hands, you can take 2 prizes and your opponent can only take 1 prize. That's just an insanely strong, but I don't think the card is broken. I think, well, I like that you can reuse the Rainbow aspect, but the prize denial is balanced. Another thing that's important to note is we're getting Enhanced Hammer back. We have Temple of Sinnoh. Those both turn this card off and completely negate the effect. So if your opponent just puts down a Temple of Sinnoh and knocks you out, Legacy Energy isn't really going to be doing anything for you. So there is counterplay to this card as well, and depending on how strong it is, we'll see it increase. But I do really like the card, and it makes me excited to play Lugia, which I'm always excited to play Lugia whenever a new format, like a new rotation or a new set drops that gives it tools, because it's just one of those decks that likes to abuse different tools, and if it can abuse things in a fair way, I think. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything in this set as a whole? And what are your top 3 cards? That's gonna be my closing remarks.
Okay. Yeah, I think the set overall pretty good. There's a lot of different things with interesting applications that I think are gonna shake up the game. There's a core couple like Unfair Stamp that are potentially gonna change the way the game is played overall. I saw someone mention something like it's like the Rebel Clash of this era, which feels so accurate, and I'm not sure if that's just because yeah, I don't know, there's a lot going on there. It feels like Rebel Clash. That's all I can say. I think that's so accurate. I don't know how else to describe it though, but it is Rebel Clash. Yeah, the set's pretty good overall. I think it's not like best set ever released, but there's a lot of decent cards in here. Top 3, I think would have to be, I think Unfair Step is probably my number 1 because that card is just universally insanely applicable in anything. And then it might be Bloodmoon Ursaluna and Drakloak. I hope I'm not just oversighting anything here. There's a lot of other good cards in this set, but I think those 2. Bloodmoon Ursaluna is another card that's really powerful. Technically just can be slotted into anything, applicable in a lot of things, and is just extremely strong. And then Drakloak, I'm just saying that kind of instead of Dragapult because I think as an archetype and like potentially best Pokemon, it's kind of tied with Ursaluna, but as an archetype, by far the best out of this set. And potentially a tier 1 meta deck overall. Could be potentially best deck in format, who knows? Like if the Japan results are anything to go off of, this card's really strong. But Drakloak, just because it's going to be a huge part of Dragapult anyways, and I think contributes to the success, but because that card can also be used in any other deck as a new form of engine too.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good general way to say I think my number 1 best card, Unfair Stamp, is going to take that spot. Number 2, I'd have to agree, is Bloodmoon Ursaluna. Like, they're both just 2 cards that are so universally good and will change decks' game plans against certain decks. It'll change how the game's played. Good. I think I'm gonna choose Dragapult over Drakloak though, just to change it up a little bit. But we do share similar opinions. I think that Dragapult as a card is just really strong. Yes, Drakloak does contribute big portion to its success. Being a main attacker and being able to manipulate the damage in the way that no weakness Dragon type is gonna be really strong. I also have my Legacy Energy up there. As another really good card. I think Tatsugiri's got a place. There's a lot of cards I'm really looking forward to in this set. I mean, it definitely feels like one of those, like you said, like the Rebel Clash. It's going to shake up the game, and there's a lot in here that is going to keep things interesting, which I'm really excited for. At the end of the day, we just want to play Pokemon with some cool cards, do some cool things with the card, have some fun games at the end of the day. That's how I like to play anyway, right? And that, I think, is something that's really prevalent in this set. You have a lot of things you can have fun with, a lot of things that will really shake up. So thank you all for sitting through this movie-length set review. I am Hitmonchanning. I'd like you to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it and comment down below. What do you think of this set? Give me your top 3 cards right down in the comments and let go if you enjoyed it. And once again, thank you to Mitch and Chicken. Please go check out his channel. He posts some incredible insight into the way decks are played and why certain cards are great in certain decks. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't really do when they're talking about a deck. They kind of just say the cards that are in there, but Mitch and Chicken Daniel over here will be kind of telling you the general flow of gameplay with his deck profile, so please do go check him out. He's got some really great info on a lot of the meta decks in the format right now. Any more closing words then, or should we wrap it up?
No, I think you've done it well enough.
All right, with all that said and done, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, Hitmonchanning out.